Good afternoon, everybody. Maybe good morning if you're on the West Coast. Happy Thursday for week 11 Showdown show by Established to Run. I'm Gary Hartman, joined as always by my good friend, the Showdown King, Cody Main. Cody, how you doing today?
I'm good, Gary. We're officially like in the latter part of the season here now, officially in the second half of the season. No more halfway, midway point. This is week 11. We're kicking off week 11 with what I think is an interesting game. We'll see how things shake out, but happy to dive into it with you.
I agree. I think it's interesting. Obviously, the Packers finally, hopefully, turning a corner for their season as they, had that win against Dallas last week, and Tennessee getting Ryan Tannehill back, and getting into those cold weather Lambeau games. Like this is, I think this is a little bit more of a fun game than maybe it looks like on paper. So let's dive right in, and let's start as always with kind of some macro talk. You see some numbers there as far as what constructions might look like this week. I know you and I were just talking right off camera that we think maybe the Green Bay onslaughts will be a little bit heavier than you see there. Why don't you take away any macro thoughts that you have?
Yeah, look, I mean, the elephant in the room at this point right now is Randall Cobb is activated from IR. It sounded as if he was probably okay to play last week, but because of the IR rules, the 4-week window that he had to be out, he was not able to play last week. So we're kind of expecting him to step right back into that primary slot role. And the problem with that is DraftKings left him priced at $200 because he was on the IR entering the week. So that is going to funnel roster construction really heavily towards the 4-2, the 5-1, as you see there, 43.2% of the field projected to use 4 Packers, 2 Titans, another 18, 19, 20% of the field expected to use 5 Packers, 1 Titan. That's really just going to funnel roster construction in that manner where you're going to see really similar builds when you get to that. You're going to see a lot of the high-priced Packers plus Cobb with like a Derrick Henry bring back. I think that'll be a very popular construction. And if right off the front, if you want to try to find a way to get different, I think even 3-3 will be a little bit underutilized relative to how often I think it's optimal, and certainly 2-4. If you think that maybe the Titans can come out and maybe impose their will on the ground, as we'll get into here with some of these options, 10% utilization is really, really interesting. It's just tough to get there from a baseline perspective because of the pricing on this slate. It really wants to funnel you into the Packers.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. Let's talk it through position by position. I don't have much to add to that. Let's start with quarterback here. Obviously, getting Ryan Tannehill back. Did he play last week?
He did.
He did. All right.
So yeah. Two long touchdown bombs to Nick Westbrook-Akine.
Right. Of course. Right. Traylon Burks was like in play at 3K. Oh my God, my brain is all scrambled with NBA.
Oh, I hear you, man.
Right.
It's that time of year.
It really is. Second game of Ryan Tannehill being back from those 2 Malik Willis, I don't know, disasters or whatever you want to call them. So anyway, he's only 800 less than Aaron Rodgers here. It's hard for me to not like Rodgers more. I'm not comparing the two necessarily apples to apples. I think both guys are in play. But any thoughts at quarterback here? Only 57% on Aaron Rodgers seems a little low to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And when we run final ownership before lock, I could imagine both of these guys coming up, though we've seen it so often. And I keep going back to this point just because it's so shocking to see these quote unquote bad quarterbacks continuously under-owned in Showdown, both at the flex and captain position. So while I think the salary constraints on today's slate will allow you to get both Rodgers and Tannehill relatively comfortably, I still get the sense that like Rodgers might come up and Tannehill might come down a little bit. And I think that is mostly right. I'm much more excited about this Packers passing attack against this Titans defense with now the weapons that Rodgers has, as some of those guys have started to emerge. He gets Cobb back. I think it really sets up well for the Packers aerial attack as a whole. With that said, I still think Ryan Tannehill should be in your cash game lineups. I think that the floor provided by the quarterback position is just so much better than the options that you're going to get around it. And when we start to look at the rest of the Titans that we can roster, if you're not playing Derrick Henry, there's very few other guys that you can get excited about at their respective price tags. So for me, looking at the quarterback position as a whole, both of them should be part of our cash game roster construction. In tournaments, I am a little bit more intrigued by Rodgers captain just because of the wide receivers that are now emerging. We'll talk about it in a second here, but we have Christian Watson, we have Lazard healthy, Cobb is back. And now you're going to do a situation where you could start to see Rodgers double stacks, Rodgers triples even, given some of the price points that we're playing into. I think that those are certainly in play for small and large field GPPs.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Rodgers is actually a very good play on this slate. Tannehill's fine, but I'll talk about in running back here why I think Derrick Henry. Actually, let's just go right over to that. I think Derrick Henry is a good chalk on this slate. These are the these are the Derrick Henry type of games, right? Cold weather, November, the matchup's pretty good. Like this is the time he's going to get 25 plus carries. Like these are the games for me for Derrick Henry, and I don't mind the ownership. I don't know if you feel differently.
Yeah, look, I mean, we talk about it all the time when we see 80% plus total ownership, 20% plus captain ownership. Like that's generally not the type of plays that I'm just trying to full fade and say, okay, this is how I'm going to beat the field. Usually I like to be around that, maybe even try to find a way to get over it with basically a lock button position on these types of plays. I will say generally the plays that we're talking about in this type of ownership range are the Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jacksons of the world. I think there's a little bit more inherent risk, especially with game script related stuff, or if he just runs really poor on touchdown efficiency. There are more outcomes, I think, where like Derrick Henry just has a fine game and doesn't blow you away. Even if he gets 20 carries for 95 yards, doesn't hit the 100-yard bonus, doesn't fall into the end zone, that's a great, it's a relatively good game. It's just not going to get you there in terms of the box score, the fantasy output. But I will say, this is the matchup, right? Yeah. We know that Todd Downing, we know that Mike Vrabel, we know that the Titans want to establish it. They rank 30th in pass rate over expectation, and now they get this matchup against the Packers defense. Football Outsiders rush DVOA, they rank 30th. They're 8th in pass DVOA. They've allowed the 4th highest explosive rush rate, 5th highest rush EPA per play. Like this is. If you're in the game planning boardroom here with Mike Vrabel and Todd Downing, they're like, let's give Derrick Henry 25 plus touches and make the Packers run defense prove that they can stop us. I don't know that they'll be able to. So I'm with you. I love Derrick Henry. He's really tough to get away from. I'm playing with a few cash game rosters right now, and I've got one that's got Henry at captain. And I've got one that's got Mason Crosby at captain, which we'll get to here at the end of the show.
Yeah, interesting.
But I think it's really tough to get away from him given the context of this slate.
Yeah, let's. I want to talk about this question from Charlie. So I think there's a couple ways to mitigate that risk that you were talking about. As far as usually when you see these 83%, it is a quarterback, right, or a really, really, really high floor Cooper Kupp or something like that in the right matchup. I think the way to mitigate it is either taking a stand on one of these places, either flex or captain, right? So I think one way you can mitigate it is coming well under and captain and being, putting more of it in flex and just hoping that a receiver really has a breakout game, but you still need Derrick Henry in your lineup. I am an aggressive player in which I would be comfortable taking a real stand on Henry and captain, where like, I don't care if I get the 30% Henry and captain, but I think one way to do it is to take a stand on one way or another. And if you feel like you're a little worried about the 83% captain Henry ownership, I would come in well under and captain. I'm not worried about it, but I think it's a decision point for sure on the slate.
And I will say, to your point on wanting to take get a leverage position if you're in on Henry and looking at his captain ownership, if you just wanted to get 40, 60, 80% captain, like if you look at his box scores, it is kind of boom or bust, despite him being.
That's what I'm saying. I don't mind just taking
exactly.
If I take the L, I take the L.
If you take the L, it doesn't matter whether you've got him at flex or captain. If he gives you, he's had 8.5 or lower DraftKings points in 3 games this season, and it's basically been above 20 in all other games. Yeah. So if you're getting the 8.3 DraftKings point performance, it doesn't matter if you have it at flex or captain, but if you get that 20, 25 plus DraftKings point performance that we've seen so consistently from him, you really want that at captain, especially again in the context of this slate where this game might be ugly, and like 25 could be more than enough in this game.
Yeah,
so I like that point. I guess
these cold weather November, December Henry games. Like, yeah, and you hit it. Like the Packers know what's coming. Can they stop it? Is the question. I don't know. Maybe they can. Like this was a team coming into the season we thought was going to be one of the best defenses in football. They do have home field. Like maybe they turned a corner. You can make the argument against Derrick Henry. You can, but I don't know. It's a tough one. All right, let's talk the Packers, guys. Aaron Jones, really expensive, 11-2, only 400 less than Derrick Henry, coming in with almost 25% less ownership, though. How are you looking at the Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon of it all?
Yeah, I really like Jones as well, and I think the fact that he's priced within $400 of Derrick Henry will help to keep his ownership in check. As I kind of mentioned off the top, salary really isn't a problem, so you can get to Aaron Jones if you want to, and that might just force his ownership up a little bit. But the role has been really strong lately, and the way to attack this Titans defense is through the air with the running backs. They've been relatively strong on the ground, but they are giving up receptions at the league's 3rd highest rate. And that's where Jones is going to feast. He's already leading the backfield in rushing share, leading the backfield in target share, and is getting all of the high leverage stuff, or majority of the high leverage stuff, short down and distance, long down and distance, 2-minute. That's where we want our running backs on the field, especially on DraftKings with the PPR scoring. And so, if you're going to pay me off with, I don't know, a 2-to-1 or so ownership discount on from Henry to Aaron Jones. I don't know if it'll be that drastic, but I want to have exposure to, I guess, both of these guys. I think these are the two guys on the slate that have that massive ceiling that could really break it away.
Yeah, it's a great point about the receiving backs there against Tennessee. So I personally would love him correlated with Rodgers. I have no problem doing that a lot. Rodgers captain, I would probably boost Aaron Jones actually as much as I would boost some of the receivers. I would just throw him into that group as far as double and triple stacks if you could fit it. I mean, it's going to be expensive, obviously, with the 11-2, and you're probably not having Derrick Henry on the other side, but that's okay because maybe you're playing into an aerial attack in which Tennessee gets from behind and they need to throw a little bit more than maybe they'd want. So I think that's where I would have no problem correlating him with Rodgers. Dillon, I think, is interesting because he's 6,600, only 26%. And like, if you play into this game going under and just both teams are trying to establish it, then, he could be that bruiser between the tackles. Now, the matchup isn't great. As you mentioned, they're good. Titans have a really strong interior defensive line, especially. So I just think it's okay, but you can tell yourself a story about the game script here.
So. I think especially with Dillon in smaller field tournaments, smaller field single entry stuff, higher stakes stuff, his ownership's really going to get squeezed. I think even, people, this whole mid tier, as we'll get to with wide receivers and tight ends, this whole mid tier in general is going to get overlooked in favor of the stars and scrubs type roster construction. But I think even the folks that do find themselves kind of in this 5 to 6K ish range will more often land on Robert Woods, will more often land on Christian Watson, who we'll get to. And so I just think that for sure you could see this 26.9% projected ownership on Dillon get squeezed out in those type of contests as well. You brought up an interesting point that I don't want to gloss over on back to Jones and boosting Aaron Rodgers when you have Captain Jones, or boosting Jones in the flex when you have Captain Aaron Rodgers makes so much sense. And it's one way to get unique without really doing anything to get unique, because as you alluded to, playing Captain Aaron Jones and Aaron Rodgers will likely get you off of Derrick Henry.
Yep.
And if that's the outcome where Derrick Henry does fail, where Derrick Henry does give you those 8.5 DraftKings points that he's done a couple of times this season, then you lap a huge portion of the field. So I think that was a really sharp point that you brought up, and I just didn't want to gloss over it.
Yep. Agreed. Cool. Any interest in Hilliard or Haskins here?
Hilliard's actually interesting because they finally priced him to a point where like it's not even a so bad it's good type of play. Like 3,200, I think for him is fair, and it's coming with a little bit of ownership. Someone mentioned in chat, can you play Hilliard with Henry? It's a tough needle to thread, but in large field stuff, I think it is also one way that you can get unique with your Derrick Henry lineups. You could get the 2-minute drive from Hilliard, and maybe he catches a couple of passes. Maybe he's the guy that happens to steal a touchdown, but you still get the really big rushing performance from Henry, and both of those guys end up being optimal. I would still recommend a dock on Hilliard when you have like Captain Henry, but I would not be excluding those two together. So just a little bit of interest where, Hilliard's 3,200 and the skill position really drops off after, the 5K range.
Agreed. All right, let's go to receiver. Let's break it down by team. So I think Green Bay is the much more interesting team to talk about, obviously, here. We haven't really been attacking Tennessee receivers all year. We'll talk about that in a second. So Christian Watson obviously comes way up after the explosion game, 7,400. Surprised, actually, to see a more expensive Allen Lazard come with more ownership than this is just my brain, not knowing any of the numbers behind ownership projections. I'm a little bit surprised to see Lazard coming in with more ownership than Christian Watson. And then we'll talk about Randall Cobb as his own thing. But what are your thoughts on Lazard and Watson here tonight?
Yeah, that was my first takeaway too. Like, you look at the situation where you have Allen Lazard at 8,600, Christian Watson at 7,400, and Watson is the guy, is $1,200 cheaper, is the guy that just put up 35 plus DraftKings points, right? And why would he be less owned than Lazard? And I think that is just a result of projection systems still anchoring to Lazard being the wide receiver one in this offense. Which maybe we can have a discussion about that. Like, after what Watson did last week, is now does Watson have a case for earning more targets going forward? Our projections don't think so. Our projections are giving him a little boost based off of, the route participation last week and his involvement in the offense, but it is still just a 1-week sample. I think what we'll see here basically is Lazard and Watson operate on the perimeter and mostly squeeze out Sammy Watkins. And then with Watkins squeezed out, Cobb back, I think we see Cobb slide right back into that primary slot role. And, it's just going to be a situation where I think the fact that our projections are anchoring to Lazard being the wide receiver one is why he's more owned. And you see that kind of there in the difference between their projections, but maybe that's a discussion we need to have. Is Allen Lazard still the wide receiver one in this offense in your mind?
He is still the wide receiver one in the offense in my mind, but I do think as far as kind of getting into the psychology of your casual DFS player that likes to play a showdown slate, I think they're all hitting Christian Watson tonight,
Oh, for sure.
especially
Yeah.
especially as the lower price. So I think this will be a closer gap than, I mean, it's not a huge gap, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it be closer, even if Watson comes in a little bit over. But I also haven't messed around with construction. So like if you have money left over because you're playing Cobb in these double stacks, maybe you can just get to Lazard. And I would prefer Lazard for sure tonight, especially coming off that big. Watson's still a big play, boomer bust guy. Lazard has volume in the middle of the field and can get you there that way. So I would prefer Lazard. I still think Rodgers has more trust with Lazard. I think Watson's for real, and I think he's going to be a thing in fantasy for the rest of the season. But I would prefer Lazard and vacuum. I'm just surprised to see the ownership be higher on him.
So this is one of those things where I could see if we flip. Let's just use like the $200 double spy. If we flip that the ownerships in that contest versus like the $15, the lotto. Everyone that's got access to good projections is playing in the $200 double spy. They're looking at everything. They're going to see that there's a 4 base projection. There's like a 4% or 4 projection point difference between Lazard and Watson. I would imagine that Lazard is more owned in the $200 double spy, but Watson could be more owned in the $15 lotto, if that makes sense. So if we flip, I could see those being reversed. So if you're playing in the smaller field, a little bit higher stakes stuff, it might actually end up being sharp to get onto Watson, who could come in, lower owned because everyone's got access to projections. Everyone's using that. Whereas like a more casual field, like the lottery type stuff, you could see Lazard be the guy that gets squeezed there because more casuals want to click Watson's name.
That's what I'm expecting to happen. But again, you've been doing this for a lot longer than me, and I think you have the best ownership projection stuff in the business. So I don't want to question that either. But we'll talk it through. Keep an eye on projections throughout the night. I think that could change a little bit. All right, let's talk about Randall Cobb here. 200 expected to play. Another guy that probably has the most trust of these three with Aaron Rodgers. I would expect him to be on the field in all 3 receiver sets. I think Sammy Watkins is complete dust. Proved it again last week. I think he gets squeezed out here. And I think another place where we already spoke about this, the ownership is probably going to come in higher than this 23 total percent.
Definitely. And definitely using the $200 double spy as the example there, this will push 40%. Could even come in higher than that. I do still think in casual fields, there's like this aversion to clicking on the guys that are complete stone minimum priced. And if the IR tag happens to stick by his picture on DraftKings, that will have some impact on it as well.
Yeah.
There will also be some concern, even if we get the Schefter report or the Rappaport report that he's going to play, he's going to be the primary slot receiver. There will be some aversion to going back to a guy that just came off of IR. So yeah, I think in casual fields, probably 25 to 30% ownership. I think it's a pretty good play even there. He doesn't need to do much to pay off that price tag. Just be cognizant of the lineups that you're building around Cobb. If you play Cobb and you start to get into Aaron Jones and you start to get into Derrick Henry, you're really leaving yourself very few ways to get different after doing that. So, I kind of like playing Cobb with maybe a Rodgers and kind of going like a more balanced approach. You could also play Cobb and leave some salary on the table and just assume that those high price guys just fail relative to the guys that are a little bit cheaper than them. So just be cognizant of your overall lineup construction. If you're playing a $200 Randall Cobb, it just funnels you to a very similar roster construction as everyone else. Yeah. So that's something that I would keep in mind.
So I actually think, and I never think this with Showdown, but I think because he's $200, I think Rodgers quadruples in play. Yeah, right. So I think you go Cobb, Tonyan, one of Lazard and Watson and Jones. I don't know if that all fits, but if it does, I think it makes sense.
And that's an interesting way to play into like it's going to project pretty well, and it's also going to be a common construction. It'll be be that like 4-1 type, 5-1 type stuff, but it won't. That type of construction won't be
right with 4 of his pass catchers with him.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think in that case you have a Rodgers captain if you can fit it. But anyway, all right. So I'm not into Watkins, Torrey, and these punt guys this week. I'm just not. I think there's with Cobb back, with Tonyan still getting all that fields, with Josiah DeGora running routes, with Aaron Jones being such a staple of the pass game. I just don't think you need to go there. Obviously, we're not. This is Showdown. You talk about it all the time. Anyone that's going to project for something should be in your player pool, but I'm not interested in these guys here. Personally.
Yeah, Watkins will be in my player pool. I'm curious to see like how much I would get onto him, just kind of running with my loose rules, because the 9.4% projected ownership is going to really facilitate a lot of the constructions that I'm trying to get onto. But I agree with you from a baseline. If you're playing a single entry, if you're playing 3 max, there's no need to go to Sammy Watkins at 4,800 with the options that are priced below him and the options that are priced directly above him. It's going to make a really tough case. It's one of those situations where I always say you need to be paid off with a big enough ownership discount. 9.4% is kind of bordering on that, but I think like the Sammy Watkins still carries name value. And because of that, I think in more casual fields and more MME type stuff, he might actually come in a little bit higher than that.
Which is like, I've never seen who was an elite college receiver and high draft pick carry name value further into a career than Sammy Watkins. I mean, I was shocked.
Is it fair to say that he still has name value?
I think so. That's what's crazy.
Crazy.
Coaches have convinced themselves this guy is good for like 5 more years than he actually has been. I mean, Tavon Austin too. I couldn't believe Tavon Austin was still on a roster like this year. It's crazy.
Yeah, right.
Very similar guys to me. I mean, Watkins has had a little bit of a better career, but anyway, bust central to me as far as Sammy Watkins' career, but he's still playing, so good on him. Anyway, all right, Titans. I'm not interested much here at all. Robert Woods to me at 27% owned is just bad at 6,800. There's a floor case, I guess, like 4 or 5 catches. I don't see the ceiling case here at all. I don't know if you disagree with me, but
yeah, I'm with you. It's really hard to get excited about any of these guys. And look, I know with the ebb and flow of the NFL and with coaches having time to game plan, I don't know if like on a short week how much the Packers defensive game plan is going to change to really stop what the Titans do well. But I would imagine that they're going to make their best effort here to put an end to Derrick Henry. I just don't know if they'll be able to do that. And the Titans don't want to throw, man. Like they rank 30th in pass rate over expectation, negative 11.5%. This is like Atlanta, Chicago level, low pass rate over expectation. And the fact that now we have Treylon Burks back, we have Nick Westbrook-Akine, who is apparently catching long touchdown passes now with ease. It's really tough to get excited about any of these guys. I will say, and I say this, golf is top of mind because we just locked on the last swing season event, and these rookie golfers tend to get overowned because the field wants to be first on them. And I think it happens here. It happens in season long NFL. It happens in daily fantasy NFL. I think people want to be first on like the breakout. They want to be first on Christian Watson. They want to be first on these guys. Treylon Burks, if he doesn't come with a ton of ownership, that's a guy that I want to be first on.
Yeah, that's
I want to get paid off with low ownership. And if he does come with low ownership, he is a guy that I think could actually demand targets at an elite rate. We've seen it a couple of times early on in weeks 2 and 3, I believe, or weeks 1 and 2, where he had like a 38% targets per route run rate. Like if he could get a full complement of snaps, 75, 80+% of the team snaps, and could get back to that 35%, 40% targets per route run rate, he could pay off that $5,200 tag, even in a low volume pass attack. I just don't want to hold hands with the field and like hope for this guy's breakout with, 40%, 30+% of the field. If it comes in closer to 20%, I think Treylon Burks is pretty interesting at 5,200.
Yeah, I agree there. He would be one of the 3 that I'm most interested by a long shot. I guess Nicholas Westbrook-Akine's price up is taking kind of out of the field's hands a little bit here. Like obviously he's coming off his crazy. It's funny, we're getting Christian Watson and Nick Westbrook-Akine against each other, who both were optimal last week in the main slate. I think Westbrook-Akine is kind of like a contrarian tournament play. I doubt he does it 2 weeks in a row in a spot that's much more of a Derrick Henry spot. So
I'm with you. It's the same story to me. It's a little bit different of a story, I guess, than Sammy Watkins, because I do expect him to be out there. I don't think he'll get iced by any means. He's going to be out there for 65, 70% of the team's routes, but it's a similar situation in that like you need to pay me off with a big ownership discount if I'm going to go back to Nick Westbrook-Akine. And he's even more expensive. The base projection is equally bad. So, tell me that he's sub 10%, and I'm probably a little bit more comfortable with it in large field tournaments, but it does not look that attractive from a baseline perspective.
Sorry, I was on mute. I just noticed that.
You just pulled an Adam. Adam's not here to put himself on mute.
I did. It's because people think there's a flute playing in the background. It's the wind in New York City. I have the window cracked in this room, and that's literally what it is. It's crazy. So there you go. Anyway, Sweeney asked if Burks' captain is in play. You have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think he's in play. I talk about this like the guys that are a little bit cheaper. Do they have that absolute ceiling? And yeah, Burks' ceiling projection is 12.4. It's a far cry from the 26 and 24 that we have for Aaron Jones and Derrick Henry. But is 5 receptions for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns within his range of outcomes. I mean, we just saw a similar game from Nick Westbrook-Akine. If it's going to be 3 to 4% owned, absolutely, I think Treylon Burks is in play at captain.
Nice. All right, cool. Let's talk tight ends here. One other thing I wanted to say on Titans receivers. I read your article. You wrote, I definitely agree with you as far as max 2 Titans and non-Tannehill lineups. I would actually take that one further. I would do max 2 Titans wide receivers altogether. And the only way I would get 3 Titans pass catchers is if it's with like Chig or something, like a cheap tight end. I just don't think I want 3 Titans pass catchers in almost every single lineup I make.
That makes sense. I actually had that question written down to ask, so I'm glad you brought it up before, because I figured, you being the aggressive GPP player that you are, you might even say max 1.
I think it's fair if you want to do that as well.
Yeah.
I really do.
And what we're talking about, what Gary's bringing up, is like what I said in the article is max 2 Titans pass catchers in a lineup that does not have Ryan Tannehill. So if it's got Tannehill, I would be okay. If it's got Tannehill captain or Tannehill flex, cool. Give me Hooper and, give me these guys. That's no problem with me. But in a lineup that does not have Tannehill, I do not want Treylon Burks and Robert Woods, or Treylon Burks and Nick Westbrook-Ikine. Gary's saying that he might take it a step further, which I'm comfortable with, and just saying max 1 of those guys in a lineup that does not have Ryan Tannehill.
I probably would, honestly.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair.
Yeah.
Totally fair.
And in Tannehill lineups, I would be fine getting 2, and I'd be fine getting 3 if I threw a Chig in there or something like that as like your cheap tight, but like it's rare, and like but it's a way to get different. Like you're flipping the build a little bit if you're doing a Tannehill triple, like but it would have to be like a Tannehill captain that I'm doing that in,
for sure. So, and salary matters so much with this. Like Gary said, with the quad, like the Captain Aaron Rodgers quad stack or something like that. The reason we can feel comfortable, or a little bit more comfortable doing that, is because of the salary. Salary is so important on this.
Yep, totally. All right, so let's talk tight ends in general here. I mentioned Chig. I think, I'm a fan. He's a Terp. He was good in preseason. He's shown that he's not like a huge route run guy, but he's, when he's out there, he's getting a little bit of work. Any interest on these Titans guys before we kind of talk about the bigger name here in Tonyan?
Yeah, I do think I have a little bit of interest in Chig. I think he's going to come in really low. The $2,600 price tag should keep that in check, but it doesn't really matter on this slate. It wouldn't matter if he was, I like it better at 2,600 than if you happen to be like 1K, where he might end up getting a little bit more ownership because he's so cheap. I don't think he's going to catch any ownership at 2,600. And the way that he's going to get there is like paying off with 1 or 2 big plays. You mentioned the targets per route runway rate, which has been absolutely elite for a rookie tight end. He just hasn't been getting those routes because they have Austin Hooper, they have Jeff Swaim, who they're willing to use a little bit. But you have a situation where his role could expand. He could get closer to 50% of the team's routes, and they're throwing him deep passes. Like he's getting shot plays. And for a tight end with his skill set, I think that is really interesting. So he's definitely going to make my large field MME pool. And because I think he gets there with like a big shot play or catching a touchdown, I think it makes sense to provide a little bit of a boost to Ryan Tannehill's projection in lineups that have Chig.
Yeah, I wish he was in a better pass game offense, because I actually think he's going to have a really good career. Like I think he's like solid athletic tight end that's going to be around for a while. Anyway, that's I'm also biased towards my Maryland Terrapins, but there you go. Anyway, Tonyan. So Austin Hooper. I don't know. That's how I feel about Austin Hooper. I feel that's how I feel. That's my analysis.
I can't do it. I can't do it with Austin Hooper, though. Like, he shoved it down my throat last week. Prize Picks had a line that was like over 4.5 receiving targets, and just jammed the under. It's like, man, it's Austin Hooper. He's running around on like 40% of the team's dropbacks. He's it's a low volume passing offense as is. They're playing the Denver Broncos, and then he goes out and gets 7 targets. Like, so. It's another one of those spots. I feel like there's a ton of these guys on this slate where if the ownership's low enough, there's a little bit of interest there. But like, I can't get that excited about Austin Hooper at 4,600.
Agreed. Any interest in Jeff Swaim?
Outside of a complete large field lotto sprinkle, no.
Okay.
Like 5 to 10% max guy.
All right, Packers guys. There's 3 tight ends here that play. So I think you eloquently wrote about how that impacts Tonyan a little bit here. I like Tonyan as a player still. I still think he's a good pass catcher that in the right matchup can, really be slate breaking. Is this the right matchup? And he needs to obviously find the end zone for it, but I still think there's a couple 2 touchdown games in his bag here. I don't know. If
I agree. It looks like it's coming with a little bit of ownership, which is the only concern with Tonyan. He is splitting snaps and routes with Josiah DeGuara, to a lesser degree with Mercedes Lewis, who we really have with basically no projection. So we're kind of giving Tonyan a little bit more of a role here, but he's running around on 59% of the team's dropbacks. The route target share is not great. The air yard share obviously isn't great. He's getting targeted near the line of scrimmage. He has to find the end zone to pay off this price tag. Right. There's no other way around it. And like you mentioned, he does have 2 touchdown games firmly within his range of outcomes, but those are few and far between. And if it's going to come with any amount of ownership, I would rather steer away. I think the way that I'm thinking through Tonyan is just a rotational piece in Rodgers doubles. And I think he's somebody that you can include in the flex in those when you have Rodgers in the lineups. Certainly with Rodgers a captain, I like boosting Tonyan a little bit to get some exposure there. But 5,800, and the fact that like he does need to find the end zone and maybe needs to find the end zone twice to pay off that tag, it's just tough.
Yeah, I would consider negatively correlating with like other Packers pass catchers that need end zone to pay off. So like not Randall Cobb's so cheap that he's going to be his own outlier this week, but like Lazard, for example, both operating, they both could operate in the middle. I mean, I know Lazard's an outside threat too, but Lazard plays all over the field. But like Lazard needs a touchdown probably to pay off as well. So I would consider it in non-Rodgers stuff to negatively correlate there. Mercedes Lewis is not a good punt. I shout out Mercedes Lewis. The guy was a 2006 NFL draft. He's 38 years old. It's unbelievable and just good on him. Like he's been just an elite blocking tight end for years and years and years. And he's a captain, guy people want in the locker room. I just fascinated that Mercedes Lewis is still hanging around the league. But he's not a good play at 600, even though he did catch a touchdown, I think a couple weeks ago or last week or something like that. I just, no, thank you. And Josiah, though, do you know how to properly pronounce his last name? Is it DeGora?
I think it's DeGuara, but I mean, we're trying. We're doing our best.
Yeah. I think he's interesting though at 1,800. Like he's somebody that kind of like he's one of those guys when you're watching a Packers game that like, oh, he just you randomly hear his name here and there. And
he's one of those guys when you bet a Robert Tonyan over and you see this guy catch a pass and you're like, yes, Tonyan. Yes, and it's Josiah DeGuara. So he's definitely involved enough to be tilting in terms of when you're betting the other guys, guys over. I think at his price tag, at the projected ownership, he definitely deserves to be an MME sprinkle and should be involved in your Rodgers stuff. This is a guy that absolutely could catch a touchdown, would be like a direct 1-for-1 fill-in for the most part in terms of pass catching situations if Tonyan were to go down or if Tonyan were to be limited for any reason. So not that we ever project that, but I absolutely think he should be involved in your Rodgers stuff.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, cool. Let's talk defense and kicker. I'm gonna actually start with kicker here because you mentioned the Mason Crosby captain thing off the top. Take me through your Mason Crosby thoughts.
So this didn't actually work out for me with the last slate that we broke down with the Eagles and the Commanders, but it wasn't. I mean, it was the Jake Elliott situation again, and we had this discussion in our Slack and between me, you, and Ryan, who were co-managing that FFPC main event team, and you guys have astutely pointed out that like kickers that are just on teams that score touchdowns are tough to trust, especially in DFS, especially in season long. Like they're just going to get their extra points and that's it. And that kind of happened with the Eagles. We didn't expect them to lose or only score 3 touchdowns, but that's kind of what ended up happening. Jake Elliott banged through 3 extra points and it wasn't enough. I had a Jake Elliott captain team that was really close to the cash line and it had Joey Sly in it, who was like the second highest scoring player on the entire slate. I think I'm going back to the well here with Mason Crosby. I think this Packers team is going to be able to move the ball between the 20s, but I think they're less likely than someone like the Eagles, someone like the Bills, somebody like that to finish off drives. And because of that, you could see Mason Crosby get a ton of opportunities. He allows the roster construction that I feel most comfortable with to work. So I talked about the Derrick Henry captain. I talked about the Mason Crosby captain. I'm leaning back and forth, but Mason Crosby makes me feel a little bit better about the pieces that I have in flex. And I feel pretty good about his floor in this game tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I like Crosby and Henry stuff too. Like that. It adds up to game script. So when you're kind of fading or not fading, but playing into Henry and the game going potentially under or more of a slog, and you're not playing into the Rodgers stacks as much, Crosby makes a lot of sense in that kind of stuff. Also, just should be noting, obviously, you can always get worried about second half of the season Lambeau weather. It's looking fine tonight. I'm thinking like 10-mile-per-hour winds. It shouldn't impact kicking too much. Just cold. It'll be cold. Josh Lambeau is, I guess, he's the kicker for Tennessee right now. I don't have any thoughts. You?
I think just like with Joey Sly on the Commanders Eagles slate, and it won't be an ownership discount to that degree, just because it was the Eagles kicker versus the Commanders kicker. But I think Josh Lambeau makes a ton of sense in tournaments and could be a final piece in cash if you find yourself in this salary range. I think with Cobb, we probably don't need to go double kicker, but I think he makes for a good kind of pivot, if you will. If you're in this range and don't want to play Crosby, who I think will end up being more popular, you could just get onto Lambeau. And I mean, we just saw it with Joey Sly, banged home like 5 field goals or whatever, and ended up being the optimal. Ended up being in the optimal lineup.
Agreed. Someone also that I don't mind pairing with Henry. Like if you get my drift, like Henry, if game script wise, I think it can make some sense. All right. Defenses quickly, and we'll get out of here with flag plants. Someone in chat just saying is DraftKings overthinking this, having the Titans be more money than the Packers here. Take me through your defense thoughts tonight.
Yeah, I actually had the Packers DST listed as one of the slate's best values, which is very uncommon for me to list a DST as one of the slate's best values just because of the volatility of their scoring. But they're at home. They're a 3-point favorite. This Titans offense has not looked good. Usually, I like my defenses against an opposing offense that is willing to drop back more, so I have more opportunities for sacks and pick sixes and things like that. But I still think this is a good spot where the Packers are 3,800. I think now with the introduction of Josh Lambo into the player pool and Cobb being active, the Packers are less of a necessity, which might be a good thing in tournaments because ownership could come down. But I mean, look at Brandon Thorne's offensive line rankings on the site. He's got the Titans as the 29th best in his midseason rankings. And although the Packers lost Rashawn Gary, and that hurts, I still think that they can get after Ryan Tannehill when he is forced to drop back. And I think that's a relatively strong play tonight.
Agreed. On the other side of that is do you know what the status is of the Packers offensive line? Is Bakhtiari playing or I don't know if you know.
I've got the injury report up here, but I don't think I've refreshed. Let me take a look.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just say
he was a DMP. So Bakhtiari is a DMP he was a DMP all week. And then Jenkins was a DNP all week, both with knee injuries. That seems pretty ominous for their status.
Right, and we know the Packers offensive line has had issues this year. Oh yeah, what's Jeffrey Simmons' status? That's important too.
He's back. That's just another feather in their cap.
I think that because the Titans are more expensive and they're coming in with less ownership, I think it's actually kind of a little bit sharp here. I mean, it's a tough spot, obviously, Packers at home. And I mentioned kind of liking the Rodgers triples and stuff like that. But, if I'm making a full portfolio, which you always like to say, like I want exposure to the outcomes where it's like Henry and Titans defense stuff, or even just Titans defense stuff in general. Packers offensive line has definitely struggled. So, yeah, go ahead.
That's such a super sharp way to play the 2-4 stuff. With 4 Titans, you get Henry, you get the DST, and then you've got like Tannehill and 1 pass catcher. And if Tannehill throws a touchdown or 2 touchdowns or whatever, and you've got the 1 pass catcher that you need, that's a good way to play that 2-4, where you've got 2 Packers on the bring back and then the 4 Titans that
you can even do like Lambo and 1 pass catcher if it's possible that Tannehill isn't going to get there with the 1. You know what I mean? So. And then you could do Rodgers with a stack on the other side. Even I think you can do weird stuff. Like we saw I don't know what ended up sticking, but it was like Commanders with Hurts on a Monday night, right? So weird stuff that got viable. But anyway,
and that game is just a good reminder that you cannot sweat and or tilt Showdown until like literally the final play.
Yeah.
Devonta Smith throws a pass 14 yards backwards, himself falls out of the optimal, and then the Commanders scoop it up and score a fumble 6 or pick 6, whatever you want to call it, and end up being in the optimal lineup. It was wild.
Yeah. Anyway, Joey, big Packers fan, lives in Green Bay, says it's cold and flurrying there. Also says that these teams played 2 years ago in prime time and the Packers killed them. Take that for what you will. Thanks for the information, Joey. All right. I think that will do it. I'll give you the honors here with Flag Plant Cody, because you've been working on this game for a while, and I also need time to think.
Yeah, I'll give you. I'll filibuster here while you think through your flag plants, because I'm struggling with mine. Usually, there's one that kind of sticks out that comes to me that is relatively low owned that I want to be much higher than market on. I kind of feel like I'm going to be holding hands with the field a little bit, but I will say in the more casual stuff, I'm trying to do a little bit more of the MME stuff on top of the single entry stuff that I've been playing, and in thinking through. And talking through with you on the show, I do think that Allen Lazard is going to come in lower owned in the $15 lotto, the $5 MME, a lot of the more casual fields. I think Allen Lazard is going to be lower owned than Christian Watson because of last week's performance and a lot of people projecting forward what they think will come from the Packers passing attack. Let's not forget, Allen Lazard still leads this team in target share, still leads this team in air yard share, red zone target share, end zone targets. He is, I know Rodgers is buddies with Randall Cobb, and that's his boy. But I think Lazard is Aaron Rodgers' most trusted pass catcher at this point of his career. So I like Allen Lazard, optimal captain at low ownership.
So I'm going to do something a little bit strange, I think, here. And I think I'm going to flag plant Aaron Rodgers. I think that 57.7%, and even if it comes up a little bit, is just too low. And I know we haven't seen the ceiling, and I know this kind of seems like a cash flag, but hear me out. I think it should be like a 75% play. This is a good pass. This is a good matchup, right? Titans pass defense has given up some big games to quarterbacks for sure. And I just think that maybe they turn this corner. And I see 30-point game potentially in there for Green Bay. I already mentioned liking Derrick Henry, but I don't think he's the third most expensive guy on the slate. Like both running backs are more expensive than him, and I don't know. It feels off to me that he's only 800 more than Tannehill. He's the third cheapest guy on the slate, and he's going to only be like 60% owned. Like it just feels a little bit off to the point where I feel comfortable taking a stand and coming in at like 75%. And that's what I always say to people, like in my GPP stuff, like all chalk is relative. Like you could get leverage in different ways. There's ways to get leverage by going over chalk. And I think this is one of those nights. So I know he hasn't been great. I know the Packers have struggled a lot, but I think, and also the reason I'm doing this is no one really jumps off the page to me in these skill position guys besides Derrick Henry. And so there's no great flags for me in this. So I think just me saying, I think Aaron Rodgers is going a little bit overlooked here.
It's funny how we remember him being bad, and we can get out of here on this point. It's funny how we remember him, being bad because it's all relative to our expectations for this Packers offense. And given that the weapons around him, it hasn't been great. But if you look at the box scores, and I know you don't consistently want 16, 17 points from your quarterback because we're now warped by Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen and those guys that consistently give us 25. But like bad relative to his box scores, I think I wrote it in the article. I think he beats his high water mark from this season where he put up 20.4 last week. I think we see a 20-point plus performance from him tonight on DraftKings, and I think that is certainly enough to get him optimal at his price tag.
I think so too. And my favorite, I think, just construction of the night is a Jones-Rodgers stack in general. I think Aaron Jones and Rodgers together. Wouldn't be surprised to see one of those two receiving touchdown games. Aaron Jones, so maybe he should be the guy you're looking to. I just think Rodgers. I agree. I think we got a 25-point plus Rodgers night tonight. So
I'm going to answer this, and then I'll let you outro here. Tannehill and Henry in cash. I think the four most expensive options on the slate should be in your cash game lineup tonight. We just talked about how none of the skill position players jump off the page outside of Derrick Henry and to some degree. Aaron Jones a little bit. You want the quarterbacks and the two running backs in your cash game roster construction, regardless of who you play at captain tonight.
Yep. Agreed there. All right. We went 41 minutes on Titans Packers. You're welcome, everyone. It's free. Please go subscribe to the page at Established to Run. Give us a like. We're trying to get to 30,000 YouTube subscribers. We'd appreciate if you help out. Definitely encourage you to check out what we have going on the premium side of things as well. I know there's going to be Thanksgiving deals. There's going to be over the halfway point. So there's discounted on the premium DFS products for the rest of the season. And of course, check out what we have going on Established to Run NBA. If you're interested in NBA, we're doing great work over there as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Best of luck on your Thursday night Showdown slate.